So today we're going to start with welfare analysis, and it follows from the demand and supply that we had discussed in the last class. What I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss demand and supply briefly so that we can follow the lecture today. So our aim is really to be able to look at the market equilibrium, the demand and supply, and try and figure out what is the gain made by consumers and what are the gains made by producers. Right? So this is really what the market would look like. This is a graph where we have the demand function, which is the red line. Yeah? It's a negatively sloped function. And we have the blue line, which is your supply function, positively sloped. Now, wherever the demand and the supply function intersect, that's your equilibrium price. And where they intersect, that gives us the equilibrium quantity as well. Right? So the equilibrium price in this case is 10. Equilibrium quantity is 200. The supply function intersects the y-axis, which is price, at 2. Right? That's how I've drawn this. And the demand function intersects the price line at 25. Again, just how I've drawn it. So now, looking at this market equilibrium, we are trying to answer what is the consumer welfare and what is the producer welfare. Now, before we answer that question, we really need to understand the demand function and supply function and how they were drawn. Really, the definition of demand and supply. Right? So when we drew the demand function, we asked the consumers what is the maximum price they're willing to pay for certain goods. Right? So like yesterday I asked you for a chewing gum, what is the maximum price you're willing to pay for that chewing gum? Right? So maximum willingness to pay is really how you define the demand function. Now, supply function is you ask the producer what is the minimum price at which you're willing to sell the good at. So when they're thinking about this question, what is the minimum price that I'm willing to sell at, he or she is thinking about the cost of producing the good, right? And so they're thinking about all the inputs, they're thinking about returns to their investment as well, they're thinking about their pay as well. So looking at all those factors, they come up with a minimum price that which they are willing to sell the product at. If they don't get that minimum price, they would rather not produce the good. And so we have this demand and supply, and now we want to ask, let's just review demand function. So we have willingness to pay. So the value is what the consumer gets out of the product. The price is what the consumer is paying in the market. Now, these two can or cannot be equal. That's what the important point is here. The value that I get out of the product might be the price that I pay in the market or might not be the price that I pay in the market. Right? And this is the reason why you will have, so whenever the value that you get is different from the price, you're making an extra gain. Right? And so value here that I get as a consumer is the maximum that I'm willing to pay, maximum price, minus the price that I actually pay. So suppose I went to buy a t-shirt in the market and I was willing to pay, say, $15 for the t-shirt, but the market price was, say, $10. Right? So is there an extra value that I get from buying the t-shirt? Right? $15 I was willing to pay for the t-shirt. So I was indifferent between having the t-shirt or paying $15. That's what you mean by willingness to pay, maximum that you're willing to pay. Right? So I'm indifferent between t-shirt or $15. So $15 is the value that I get out of the t-shirt. It's a level of happiness or welfare that I get out of purchasing the t-shirt. I get $15 worth of value, but I only pay a price of $10. Right? So this $5 extra is the welfare that I get. It's the extra welfare that I get from instead of the t-shirt, right? So the $10 has been paid. A $15 worth of happiness has been achieved. So 15 minus 10, 5 is my welfare increase. So this is how we would calculate the consumer surplus. Right? So we're going to ask the question, let's just calculate the consumer surplus first. And we're just looking at the demand function right now, downward sloping line. Let's assume the equilibrium price is 10. So what is the consumer surplus? Well, how much, let's say I'm the consumer, one of the consumers that is predicted by this demand function. It's a market demand. Yeah, it sums up all the individual demands. But the first unit of quantity that had to be bought was me. And how much was I willing to pay for that first unit of t-shirt? You go up, wherever it hits the demand function, that measures the maximum price I'm willing to pay for it, right? So the first t-shirt, what is the maximum I'm willing to pay for it? $24, right? So that means I'm indifferent between $24 or having the t-shirt, right? If I had paid $24 for the t-shirt, there wouldn't be any consumer surplus, right? Because I had $24, I gave up that $24, I bought the t-shirt, I value both of them equally, and there's no increase in consumer surplus. There's no consumer surplus, right? I gave up a value of $24 and I bought a t-shirt which was worth $24 to me. But now what we have is, I'm not paying $24. The price is $10. I pay $10. So what is the consumer surplus? It's the value I get out of the t-shirt, 24, minus the price I pay. So what is the consumer surplus in this case? 14. Right? So it's measured by this area below the demand function for that unit above the price. I can do exactly the same thing for another unit of the good up here, right? And same thing would happen. That would be your maximum you're willing to pay. This is the actual price you pay. So the surplus is, for that unit, is going to be the difference between the value that you get minus the price that you pay, right? So if you do it for all the units that are sold, how many units are sold at that price? Price equal to 10? 20 units are sold, right? Nobody's buying the 21st unit because at 21st unit, the price that you are willing to pay is below $10. And the price is $10. So someone is willing to buy 21st unit, but they want to pay say $9. But they can't really buy the t-shirt because the market price is 10. So they won't really buy the t-shirt, right? So this is the number of t-shirts that would be sold in the market, 20, at price 10. So what is the consumer surplus? Surplus for all the consumers? Well, for each unit that has been sold, you measure the willingness to pay, the value that consumers get, subtracted by the price that they pay, right? So what is the consumer surplus? It's really this triangle area. Yeah? It's the area under the demand function above the equilibrium price that gives you the consumer surplus. And of course, only for those quantities that have been sold. Now, how would we calculate the area of this triangle? I'll just write the formula on the board. It's half into base into height, right? So what is the area of the triangle in this case? What is the base? 20. And what is the height? Well, thank you, 15 is 25 minus 10, that's your height. So that's your consumer surplus. Yeah? And how are you measuring this consumer surplus? Well, the price is being measured in terms of dollars, right? So the area of the triangle is also in terms of dollars in this case. Canadian dollars or USD, right? So consumer surplus in this case is $150. That's the surplus. Okay. Now, what about supply function? Well, supply function is really the cost that they incur in producing the good, and then there's a certain price that they get, which is the value that they're getting, right? What is the producer surplus? I think I'll do the supply function on the board here. It's the same concept that we would be doing, which is suppose this is our supply function. What the supply function measures is It measures the minimum price at which they are willing to sell the good at. Yeah? So suppose this is 1 unit. The 1 unit So the 1 unit, the minimum price that producers is willing to sell this good at is $2. Okay? Is $2. Yeah? That's the minimum price at which they're willing to sell the good at. If they don't get that $2, they're not really keen to sell the good at $2. Right? That means they're indifferent between getting this $2 and selling the product to you. Right? That's because the minimum price at which they're willing to sell the good at. They're indifferent between $2 or giving you the good. Now, supply function is measuring the minimum price. Suppose the equilibrium price here was $10, right? So what is the surplus that the producer gets when he sells this first unit of the good? So the price that he gets for that first unit is 10. That's the price, market price that he gets, which is 10. Yeah? The minimum price he was willing to sell the good at was $2, right? So what is his surplus? Well, his surplus is 10 that he gets minus 2, because $2 is the value, the minimum price of the good that he gives to you, right? So he's losing that because he's giving you the good. So the producer's surplus for that first unit is $8. Right? So what is the total surplus for producers? Well, how many units are being sold? Right. So this was 20. So what is the producer surplus in this case? Again, we'll have half into base into height. Yeah. And half into base into height. Base is, you can think of this or you can think of that. What would you guys like to think of the base as? This. Let's just think of this as the base. 10 minus 1. And the height, 20. And what do we get? Dollars is your producer surplus. Right?